Today I want to tell you about a strange case out of Australia that I came across years ago. It was a bizarre mystery where a young woman died under suspicious circumstances, and I thought it would always be one of those cases where we just never knew the truth about what happened. But just last year, at the very end of 2019, something happened that might just shed light on this enduring mystery. This is the mysterious death of Phoebe Handsjuk on December 1, 2010. Family and some people close to her get an alarming text message from Phoebe, though they didn't realize it at the time. This text message was the beginning of a chain of life-altering events that would leave them confused and grieving still. Decades later, at 10:33 a.m., Phoebe's mom, dad, boyfriend, brothers, grandmother, and a few other people that she was close to getting this message. So the text said, "Hi family. I'm in bed about to sleep. When I wake, I will transform into the most incredible human being you've ever seen. Not I will go to the hospital. It's safer there. And I hear the special tonight is tomato soup. Delicious, nutritious. I love you all very much, but not enough to send an individual text. Sorry about that. But I'm asleep, and I must be on my way merrily, merrily. Merrily. Life is but a dream, so I have no frame of reference for Phoebe. But this doesn't seem great. Yeah, I think the contents are alarming from anyone, because the person writing this just sounds off. And Phoebe's family knew she had mental illness, depression, and anxiety, mostly, and she had substance abuse issues that likely stemmed from her way of self-medicating. So, knowing Phoebe might be in a fragile state, her family is even more concerned about getting this in the middle of the day. Her mom, Natalie, was traveling when the message came through, and she didn't get it right away. But a little phone chain starts with her other family members until Phoebe's grandmother finally calls Phoebe's boyfriend, Anthony. Just a couple of minutes later, at 10:35, Anthony, who goes by Ant for short, lived with Phoebe in his very fancy high-rise apartment. Though Phoebe was just 24, struggling to find her true purpose, Ant was a really successful promoter in his 40s, and so he could provide a lot of the finer things for the two of them. Now Ant tells Grandma that when he left that morning, Phoebe seemed fine. She was sleeping off a bit of a bender that she had gone on, but nothing about her caused concern. But he says, to ease your worries, I'll check on her now. It's a little unclear if Ant actually did go home and see her or even call anyone back, but it seems like his initial reassurance that he left her sleeping and normal was enough for the family. At least then. Len was supposed to have dinner with Phoebe, and the next day at one of their favorite Thai restaurants, and he'd be able to see her in person, ask her how she was doing and make sure that she's okay. So the next day, which is now December 2nd, after Phoebe's dad gets off work, he calls one of Phoebe's phones at 6:51 p.m. Wait for one of Phoebe's phones. So she actually had two phones at the time. She had a Nokia, which was hers, and then she had an iPhone that Ant had gotten for her. And it sounds like maybe they kind of shared the iPhone. But it's actually that iPhone that her dad called at 6:51. Len was calling to tell her he was running a little bit late, like he just got off work. But the call ends up going to voicemail. He's surprised when, 30 seconds later, his phone rings. It's not Phoebe calling him back. It's an actual Ant calling from his phone. This call was extra weird because her dad said that this is the first time Ant had ever called him, ever in history. But whatever, he doesn't think too much of it at the time. He just gives them the news, "We're gonna meet up whatever," but Ant said, "Phoebe isn't even here." "What do you mean?" "I mean, when is she gonna be back? We're supposed to be meeting up soon," and he says, "I don't know. I didn't even know she'd be gone. She just wasn't here when I got home from work around 6 o'clock. But she's got to be around because her purse and her keys are here." While Ant sounds very nonchalant, this news is deeply concerning to Len, especially in light of the text message sent the day before. Len tells Ant to report her missing, but Ant doesn't think that the police will even take her missing persons to report seriously. This early on, When their call ends, Len starts another phone call and tries getting everyone he knows calling around, asking everyone who's known Phoebe or has seen her like, "Have you heard from her?" But call after a call goes to a dead end. Len, his entire family, were confused and scared, wondering where Phoebe was. But then that evening, Aunt made a second call to Len and told him Phoebe had been found. But she was dead. Len didn't understand, like he couldn't wrap his brain around it. They were supposed to have dinner that night. She can't be dead. But he quickly had to come to terms with this new reality, because Len would have to be the one to tell the rest of the family, Phoebe's mom, her two brothers, her grandparents, as more of them find out. As I said, I think her family was confused when they heard the news, as no one has ever prepared to hear that their child or sister is dead. But when Len and Natalie hear how Phoebe died, they were even more confused. They learned that around 7 o'clock that night, the building's concierge was looking for a broom. She went into the basement room, where they keep stuff like brooms and cleaning supplies and the trash compactor. And when she tried to open the door, it's just like a jam. Something was blocking it from opening, and she pushed, but she just couldn't get it open. So she peeks in the window on the door. Now it's very dark in the room, but she could see what was blocking it right away. A woman was lying on the floor, and blood everywhere. This concierge notified police, and police tell Len and Natalie that their daughter died by plunging 12 floors down the trash chute, where at the bottom, her foot was severely cut by the compact like, almost completely severed off. And she bled to death as she crawled for the door, looking for a way out. They tell the family that her death was most likely suicide or just some kind of accident. And when the results of her autopsy come back, investigators use the results to bolster their claim. Phoebe had traces of a drug called Stilnox in her system, and it's a sleeping pill, kind of Ambien, which I think is at least here in the U.S. a pretty recognizable name, and people are at least generally aware that this kind of sleeping aid can kind of mess with people. Yeah, I have known a couple of people who have used it before, and they have, like these, almost like hallucinations or the sleepwalk. And it's like wild. Yeah, so on top of the Stilnox, Phoebe also had a blood alcohol level of 0.16, which is like twice the legal moment here in the US. It's over the legal limit here in the US and Australia, where the story takes place, and on top of that, mixing alcohol with sleeping pills like that could be really dangerous. And that's why those in charge at the time felt comfortable saying, "There is no foul play here, no reason to investigate further." Either she was depressed and went into that garbage chute on her own, or she was delusional because of the mix of sleeping pills and alcohol in her system. And this was just some kind of terrible accident. Well, it's plausible when all is that she had a history of depression, had drugs and alcohol in her system, fell, cut her foot, and died. But when you get all the facts, learn every minute detail about her death and the days leading up to it, Phoebe's grandfather did. A grandfather who, mind you, is a retired detective. When you get all of that, you'll see that this case is not quite as open and shut as it seems. To Phoebe's grandfather, Lauren, Phoebe's case was jumbled from the beginning, and the more he learned about her tragic death, the more confident he became that both suicide and accident weren't likely possibilities. And there were a lot of reasons why he thought this first. Lauren couldn't get over the physics of this. I don't know how you're envisioning this trash chute, but I remembered the first time I read this story, and I kind of imagined this laundry chute. So we have this laundry chute in the house that I grew up in. It's this hole in the wall with a flap that you could push inward. And I don't know why that came to mind. Probably because that's my only frame of reference for a chute. But when I looked up the video of this, it's totally different. First, there isn't this flap that pushes in, it almost looks like a drawer that you have to pull out, but it doesn't come all the way out. It's a drawer that kind of fans open, so the top gets wider, but the bottom is still connected to the wall. So this might be a bad comparison, but kind of like where you would drop off library books in a library. So you have this steel brushed square with a handle that you can pull out. Okay, so when you pull it out, the widest the opening gets is 37.2 centimeters by 22 centimeters. That's about 14.5 inches by 8.5 inches for us people. So again, about the size of a book. If we're looking at the library, drop off the idea. Yes, that's so tiny, how could her entire body get down there? So Phoebe was a small girl. No one is debating whether or not she was in the chute. She definitely was. The question is, would it be physically possible for her to put herself in there? But it was also more than a meter off the ground. Now Lauren couldn't fathom a way in which it was possible. He was sure that this would be extremely difficult, if not impossible. So even if Phoebe wanted to take her own life, this seems like a complicated way to do it. And not to mention a very unusual and painful way to go. Well, what about the theory that this is an accident like maybe she was in a sort of delusional state and wasn't aware of what she was doing? So, to Lauren, that's not even an option. And I'll explain why he was so convinced this is physically impossible that he, on his own, contacted the maker of the trash chute and had a replica made. He got one of her friends who were in a similar size to her. So, another really tiny girl, same kind of fitness to try and replicate the police's theory of what happened. It's not like you can slide your body into this. She has to fully get in, like, ankles deep in this thing, and then maneuver herself before she can even start going down into it. Yeah, and there's a ton of readjustments and repositioning. She can't even go down with her arms at her side, and even she has to go down almost like a roller coaster position with her arms completely above her head. People helping her, or even hold the door open, so it doesn't slam on her wrists or her fingers because it's like mechanized to shut automatically. Remember, this is a replica of the one in Phoebe's apartment, and this part is so important because there were no injuries to Phoebe's fingers. They have to hold it open. Otherwise, they would have slammed on them. Also, Phoebe did have weird bruising on her shoulders and arms, specifically like on her elbows, and authorities have always blamed those injuries on her, like holding her arms out to the side, and bracing her fall on the way down. So her arms would be at her side. I think that'd be impossible. And riddle me this, if Phoebe went in there because she was so messed up on sleeping pills and booze, how did she even do it? You saw how hard it was for a person perfectly sober to get in there. And again, like the people that I've talked to, who have used an Ambien like a sleep aid, they maybe get into their car and wake up or start frying an egg or something. But it's something that they're used to doing. It's almost more muscle memory. There's no way this could have been muscle memory. Yeah, it's not muscle memory. And if she has above the legal limit of alcohol in her system, it's just not possible. Is there any chance that she went in head first? So we know she didn't. I mean, the most severe damage from the compactor was to her foot. So everyone, in this case, agrees that she went in feet first. It's actually like the only thing that all sides can agree on. But another detail complicates the physical logistics of this. When Phoebe was found, her jeans were pulled down below her thighs. You can't even say that the fall dislodged her pants, because the only way that makes sense is if she was going in head first, which we already said. We know she wasn't based on her injuries and blood patterns in the room where she was eventually found. Authorities had said that she was alive when she reached the bottom in the coroner's report. So for in Australia, the coroner is the one who can determine the manner and cause of death. But they're kind of in charge of hearings or inquiries from my understanding, and in cases Phoebe, where the family petitioned to get her death reclassified, it had to go to court. The coroner gets to make the ultimate decision. If the death was an accident, will it change, or will it be reinvestigated anyway? So from the coroner's report, he says that she crawled around in the dark, likely looking for an exit, and it probably took like 5 to 10 minutes for her to bleed out fully. And I don't think in that time when she's fallen, and bleeding to death, that she's also trying to take off her pants. Which only leaves one possibility, that she went into the chute with her pants already pulled down. That makes this physically impossible. The very first move that girl did was lift her leg higher than I could lift my leg to get into the chute before bringing up her other foot to follow while she was standing. That's definitely not possible with your pants around your thighs, which would hold your legs together like a penguin, so you can see why Phoebe's family isn't buying this. And girl, here is something else strange. Put aside the whole pants thing for a second. And let's just pretend there is some way to explain that, though for sure there isn't. But let's pretend, thinking back to the video that you just watched to get into the chute at all. You have to grip onto anything that you can find to balance for a leverage. The chute, the wall. That girl's hands were everywhere. The police didn't find any prints. Not on the wall or the ceiling or anything. I don't know how much they tried to test the walls and the ceilings. But in the official reports that came out, there were no usable prints anywhere on that steel opening. Not on the handle, not anywhere around it. No prints. To me, that sounds like it was cleaned, that it could have been. It could have been cleaned. I've also seen in the reports that steel brush is hard to get prints off of. But, as much as we saw the girl touching in the example, when you think we'd have one usable print, someone put her in that chute. It seems like the only possibility that fits. And as Phoebe's grandfather continues to push forward and investigate, he learns that the questions he has around how she got in and down the chute are just the tip of the iceberg, because the more they learn about the hours leading up to her death and how the initial investigation was handled, the deeper this mystery gets. There were some odd things about how Phoebe left the apartment when she was last seen, things that should have alerted Ant that something was very wrong the second that he walked through the door. So the timeline everyone knew initially was that Phoebe was found a little bit after 7 p.m. and had gotten home around 6 p.m. All was normal in the building because no one had found Phoebe yet when he got home, and he didn't learn what happened to her until closer to 8 o'clock, and that's about when he started notifying people. But here's the thing. What they learn is that according to swipe records, to swipe in and out of the building. So, according to key fob records, and didn't get home till around 6 p.m. 6:09 to be exact, when he walked into the apartment, which he can't remember if the door was locked or unlocked. But when he walked into the place, something was off. According to the coroner's findings, he sees broken glass on the kitchen floor, another glass on the counter, which to him says, smells like vodka. He sees Phoebe as a handbag and her keys. Then he keeps walking into the bedroom and sees what he calls a shrine on their bed with pictures and rambling, non-coherent messages written on post-it notes. I assume her key fob for the building was on her key ring. And you said that she would have needed that to get in or out. Well, then he probably thought that she was at least in the building somewhere. In fact, something else in the apartment that he found suggested that she'd be right back. According to Phoebe's fall, her hair straightener was on and plugged in. It looked like she was getting ready to go out, and I assumed that she was getting ready for her dinner with her dad. But there was something else in the apartment that should have been a cause for concern along with everything else, and saw blood. There was a little bit of blood on her computer mouse and the mouse pad, and then a little bit on a door frame. Think about this. You walk into the home that you share with your husband, Justin. There's broken glass, a little bit of blood around in different places. His wallet and keys were sitting there, something that he was using as like plugged in and left on like he was just there. It took you about 5 minutes to freak out, and call me, and you came right back, and we searched the house and then figured out it wasn't actually his car. I go to 11 really quickly. Ant does nothing, even after she doesn't come back for a little while. He does nothing. Computer records show that he's on his computer for a bit. And then at 6:51, that's when Phoebe's dad tried calling her phone, and again, for the first time, decides to call her dad out of the blue. And they talked for about 3.5 minutes. Do you think Ant was calling her dad because he had heard her phone ring? And it was just like, hey, I'm gonna return the call. I think that's what everyone thought initially. But here's the catch. Ant says Phoebe's phone was in the repair shop that day. He says there's no way that he could have known that her dad had called him, and that him calling her dad was just this total coincidence. So they have this 3.5-minute call, and remember, Dad gets off the phone and is freaking out. She needs to know where she is. He's calling everyone, and Aunt orders to take out what takes out from the very same Thai restaurant they're supposed to go to with her dad that night. So if you think that there's any chance that she did, just step out for a minute. Why are you ordering food from the place? You're supposed to be going with her? So it's when the food delivery guy gets there around 8 p.m. that Aunt realizes something's up. The delivery guy tells him that there's something crazy going on at the buildings, all blocked off. There's police, and Aunt says something like my girlfriend is missing. I wonder if this has something to do with that, and that's how he learned what happened to her. So just like you, Lauren has all the questions, and he expects that the investigators who were there on day one can give him the answers. Exactly what time did Phoebe die? Was there anything captured on CCTV footage that would help explain what happened? Was the blood in the apartment Phoebe's? Where did the broken glass come from? What do her phone and computer records show? When was Phoebe last seen alive? And by who? But here's the thing, of all of those questions, I just posed the investigation that was conducted could only partially answer one of them? So they could give some information on when she was last seen, but not like when she actually died. When Phoebe was found, not a single person, not the person who found her. Not first responders that meet the investigators. Not a single person even touched Phoebe to see if she was still alive. As I said earlier, it could have only taken 5 to 10 minutes for her to bleed to death. So even if she were alive when the concierge found her, she likely wouldn't have been alive by the time IMDS got there. But no one even checked. And no one even felt her, if she was warm or if she was cold. That literally was gonna be my next question. Do they even feel if she was no hold? We literally have no idea how long she was lying on that dark garbage room floor. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. And that brings me to the question that in this investigation, they were able to show Lauren video footage of the last time Phoebe was seen alive at 11:43 that morning. A fire alarm in her building went off, and it wasn't a real fire. But she and the rest of the residents kind of fled out of the building. She had her dog in too, and then, just a few minutes later, at around 11:50, she's seen going back in, and she seemed fine. But there's nothing else of her. No one talked to her, no one saw her, no video of her. So really, because we don't know. Was she warm or cold? She could have died any time between noon and 7 p.m. We have no smaller window between that, which to me, is just appalling. Like if someone would have just touched her. Is she ice cold? Are we looking at a time in the middle of the day when this happened? Was she warm as she had just fallen? We don't know. Was there any other video footage from the building? But apparently not a question investigators were concerned about within the initial days of the investigation. They never requested any of the CCTV footage from the building. And by the time that they were pressed to get that, and they were pressed by again outside people, not their own internal people. And it was recorded over. But the root of all our problems is that someone decided it was a suicide from the second Phoebe was found, so no one even collected the bare minimum amount of information needed to build any case. Otherwise, her phone and her computer. Yeah, those were never looked at for months. They were just left in her apartment with her aunt, and when they finally did get them, it showed that all of her emails had been deleted. At some point, though, there's no really telling who deleted them or exactly when. And there's no way to tell what they said now. The blood in the apartment tested that little bit on the door, and it was Phoebe's blood. But they just never thought that testing the blood on the mouse pad or the mouse was important. And the glass that was found on the floor, they didn't even try and figure out where it came from. At some point, it became like they accepted the theory that Phoebe probably broke a glass, cut her foot, or maybe cut her hand when she was cleaning it up. But I don't buy this. Why wasn't there blood in the chute or on the handle? Why was there zero blood by the actual glass itself? Like if you're going to use. This is the accepted theory. I needed to make a little bit of sense, at least. Well, and not only was there no blood on the chute, but there also weren't prints. So just for the sake of humoring me in the discussion, what if she's getting ready for dinner with her dad? She's doing her hair, and why not? It's the afternoon. It's the evening. Let's have a drink. And in the middle of getting ready, she gets a glass of whatever, and it breaks. And she's already having a rough time. She's kind of been on a bender, and I know it seems so small. But maybe breaking the glass, kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like you said before, an episode that oftentimes suicides, the decision to act on it happens in like 5 minutes. And so she's cleaning up this glass, goes to throw it down the garbage chute, and at that moment, she believes that it's not worth it. And goes down with it. So I've literally played out every scenario 100 different ways, even this one. And with that one, why only clean up some of the glass and not all of it again? You make it all the way to the chute, but you only cleaned up half of it. That doesn't make sense to me. That seems more premeditated. If she set that up, and why pause and go to your computer while you're still bleeding? And you know what would be super easy to disprove this? If I could just say there was no broken glass or anything from their apartment found in the garbage chute with her. But again, the police didn't collect any of the garbage bags around her. So if she did take the garbage and make the decision, we just have no way of knowing that that's even possible, or even any sort of other clues that could have been there first. I think the whole drinking glass thing was bogus. Personally, the report from the person who was assisting the coroner said there was no liquid on the floor, no proof that the glass even came from a drinking glass. But there was a mention in the report of a substance on the wall that was a shocker. That substance was never tested. It just doesn't add up. But apparently, me, you, Phoebe, is family. We're the only ones who think so, because every official has no problem saying nope, nothing more to see here. Nothing more than an accident. Move on. Phoebe's death was closed without any real investigation, and so Phoebe's family was forced to take matters into their own hands. In Phoebe's case, her family appealed for a formal inquest into her death. That's how we have all of this info that we do. They were granted an investigation, and after that investigation, there is this full inquest where everyone from the case was called to speak, and every last detail was analyzed. And it's from those reports that I got most of the information for this episode, because, luckily, they were made public and reposted online. Now this entire inquest and investigation. It was a horrible and grueling process for the family. But you look at this story, and the whole time they have to be thinking. Finally, everyone can see what we've seen for so long, and they can finally see that this doesn't make sense. But if you read the reports, and there are two, it doesn't go that way. There is one report from the counsel assisting the coroner. Basically, this is the person who is the second set of eyes and ears, making sure everyone hears and sees the same thing. And their report gives a formal recommendation to the coroner for how they think he should rule. Well, the assisting counsel's report said, basically, something is up. I don't know what it is, but we should at least rule this death undetermined. But the coroner overrides this and says no. It's exactly what it was in the beginning. Tragic accident. Now I don't know a lot about the Australian legal system, but when I heard the host of Phoebe's Fall talk about this ruling, they say that it's super unusual for the coroner and the assistant counsel not to agree. What is he saying that I'm not seeing? If you read the full report about the inquest, they did spend a lot of time talking to Phoebe's psychologist, who did say that she was the most worried about in the time leading up to her death. Phoebe had made some comments that were the closest she'd ever come to suicidal ideations. So maybe that was what swayed in. But aren't they supposed to be just dealing with the facts around the scene and the body? It's the circumstances surrounding it. It's not just the physical evidence. That's why I said when I think coroner, I think it's a different meaning in Australia. Then we think about it here in the US. But I guess I don't care about how depressed she was, Like what they're claiming she did seems to me at least physically impossible. I cannot fathom how it has got jumbled so badly like this isn't 1950. This took place in like 2010 in a big city. The basics of investigations were just completely disregarded. To me, it feels like a cover-up. But I have no idea why someone would want to cover up Phoebe's death when she wasn't even close to like a political figure. But would it interest you to know that Ant's father was a retired Supreme Court judge and his stepmother was a current city county judge?